to Real Reviews Retro, where we take a look back at older Hollywood releases and let you know if they're worth your time, money, and patience. I'm your host, Walter Benazian. Today, we reach back into 1993 and pull out Robert Townsend's superhero film, The Meteor Man. Joining us for the discussion is film director and MFA graduate Blake Labriola. The Meteor Man follows a mild-mannered substitute school teacher named Jefferson Reed, who lives in a gang-riddled neighborhood in Washington, D.C. When he is chased by the local gang, the Golden Lords, and escapes, he is hit by a large meteor fragment which absorbs into his body, giving him extraordinary superpowers. From there, he becomes the Meteor Man and tries to put a stop to the gang violence in his dangerous neighborhood. Robert Townsend, the star of the movie, also wrote, directed, and produced this film. Townsend was a popular stand-up comic in the early 90s and had previously directed a few movies and comedy specials. MGM had to have a lot of confidence in him to handle this project because this was not a cheap movie. It had a big budget for the early 90s and had big stars in it. They included Bill Cosby, James Earl Jones, a pre-famous Don Cheadle, Luther Vandross, Sinbad, Eddie Griffin, Marla Gibbs, Robert Guillaume, and even Frank Gorshin, among others. Gorshin was the Riddler in the 1960s Batman TV show, so that was a nice little nod. Obviously, The Meteor Man was intended for African-American audiences, but it does have a small, pretty diverse following online. So Blake, what did you think of The Meteor Man?
It's interesting. It's a very, very strange movie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Robert Townsend didn't know exactly where he was going with it. He took a bunch of different things, a bunch of different ideas, and tried to put them all together into what kind of ended up being this mishmash of a bunch of different styles. You know, it's like he was sort of taking a concept of a blaxploitation film from the 70s, and then he was trying to mix it with a superhero,
Right.
Superman kind of references. And then there's this strange, almost childlike humor,
Right.
childish humor in
Mm-hmm.
a way. It's very odd. It's like he didn't know where to go, and this was his one chance to put everything
He's ever wanted
into one thing.
One Meteor Man.
One Meteor Man.
Yes. So Robert Townsend was obviously popular in the early 90s. His popularity has obviously dropped off. I don't think a lot of people know who he is now, but back then he was a pretty famous comedian. So MGM produced this movie and was the studio behind it. So they had to have, like I said, a lot of confidence in him because there are a lot of like pretty good effects for the early 90s in it. And you know,
But then, you know, as much as there's these effects, it's like at times it's trying to be like an actual like African American superhero, and then they just give him all of these random powers.
Yeah.
I mean, they give him the power to touch books, and then for 30 seconds he gains all of the information in the book. But then at the end, he also, like, it's like the book takes over their personality because him and the bad guy take on this runway model, information, and they start strutting as runway models.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely contradictory to what you had been thinking.
The superpowers for Meteor Man are pretty ridiculous. I mean, I don't think there's any limit to what he can do. They just he has super speed, so you know all the regular Superman kind of stuff, and he can fertilize the ground and create giant vegetables and fruits in the movie. Very weird. He can create storms with his breath.
That's
like
right.
That kind of
That's
thing.
right.
So obviously, I think they were taking off of some of the tone and especially some of the music cues was really from the Superman movies with Christopher Reeve in the 70s and 80s. So I think that was a big influence on him, and maybe he just is a big. I'm not sure, but I'm sure he's probably just a big comic book fan and wanted to make a superhero film. He also starred in a Disney Channel original movie called Up, Up and Away in 2000, and that was also a superhero film. He directed it. It was a Disney Channel original movie, but still, he played a superhero. It was about a family of superheroes, and so same kind of deal, but a little bit more toned down for kids, I guess. I don't know.
Sorry, you've seen that.
Yeah, that's another one.
It's just very interesting because it really is like he's trying to do a superhero movie, but then he just makes it his own, and it really strikes me as something where somebody should have stepped in and said, Robert, this is a little weird. You should tone it back, and you should maybe go for a bit more of a streamlined approach. And there was nobody to do that because he wrote it.
He was everything on it.
He did everything on it. It was basically his movie, so he could do whatever he wanted.
Right.
And, you know, interestingly enough, that he has all of these people in this film.
That's what was most striking to me, I think, is the cast in this movie is pretty insane. I mean, talk about James Earl Jones. I mean, one of the most famous actors, I think, of the 20th century and beyond, even, and voice of Darth Vader, this big, movie star and a theater star as well. And he's in this movie as the comic relief. Just really weird.
He has a strong presence whenever he's on screen. His voice obviously has a strong presence, and he is this statuesque kind of person. And then he plays the funny little different wig man. It's very strange. It's very strange, and I mean, it creates a good sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it definitely is a point that you go into the movie and you're like, oh my God, that's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something odd about it.
It is. It's just the casting is very strange.
There's something slightly, I mean, the contradiction, there's something slightly feminine about his character. And with James Earl Jones, it's just like perfect, but strange at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So it's off casting. I mean, Bill Cosby is in it. He's more of a homeless mute. He takes in dogs. So he has a pretty integral role in the movie, but he doesn't say anything. And it seemed like that was kind of a running theme with a lot of these cameos and specially featured actors in the movie. They don't say anything. Like Luther Vandross has a few scenes. He just makes a lot of facial expressions. He'll tap his gun to his head and be like, that's all they do. I mean, what do you think the motivation behind that was? Just to get as many stars in there as we can. They can't act. Just don't say anything.
Yeah,
just make a few facial expressions.
I think that was a big thing. He really wanted to just bring in as many stars as he possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in a longer version, they had bigger parts or more lines, and it got cut down. And he just wanted to include, the actual. Faces of the people. I mean, Cypress Hill is in it.
Yeah.
And you blink and you don't even catch it. I mean,
Sinbad has a special appearance. It's very small roles, they just seem shoehorned in there. Just like, hey, look who we got.
Right. And that whole, there was this whole subplot. It's sort of a subplot that was about him, trying to get with that girl that was the other teacher. Mm-hmm. And then Sinbad shows up as the boyfriend, and you're like, oh, so that's not happening, it is happening, and then it's just completely forgotten about.
That seems like
Sinbad
something,
right,
that was swept under the rug and everything. So Eddie Griffin plays Robert Townsend's best friend in the movie. So he plays a scientist teacher. They didn't really specify what he does, but...
Eddie Griffith.
Yeah.
He plays Eddie Griffith as teacher.
Right, so it was just the casting and overall... You could tell the direction was very strange. Robert Townsend himself, let's talk about him.
Yeah, what did you think of Robert Townsend?
Well, it's I've seen him in a few other things, and he's not nearly as awkward as he is in Meteor Man. I don't understand what his goal was. I understand maybe he's trying to go for the humble, guy who is a little bit selfish and then becomes Meteor Man and has to take on a bigger responsibility, the regular kind of superhero thing, But his acting is so awkward.
It's so bland.
Right, it's just really weird. I'm not sure what...
He's the most uninteresting character in the whole movie.
I
mean, mind you,
agree.
he's got everybody else has these weird parts.
People can be super over the top, a few of those characters. Right. He's really subdued.
He's just subdued, absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's like and it's not even that he's normal, it's just that he is just bland. Mm-hmm. Even Marla Gibbs as his mother, she comes off as kind of normal in the beginning. And then she gets wacky. She starts making costumes for him.
Mm-hmm. Standard for the 90s superhero.
Yeah, he still doesn't even have reactions to things. Mm-hmm. He has all these superpowers. He's just like, I've got superpowers.
Yeah, wow.
It's kind of like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, Kung Fu.
Yeah, right. I mean, that worked, I think, for Matrix, but in this, it's just, because everything else is so over the top, like having this straight of a character, I think was sort of a detriment to it. Yeah. Looking back now. I mean, the reason I wanted to review this in the first place is because it's a movie that I rented, my brothers rented all the time when we were kids. It was, a sort of an obscure thing. Right. So it came out in 1993. I mean, think early 90s, think of like Power Rangers, Lois and Clark. I saw a little bit of an influence. I'm not sure if that came out after this or not, but some of the tone.
It's during that same time.
Yeah, so
During that
like
same time.
especially the scene where like you were talking about his mother dressing him up in different superhero costumes. It's the same,
Yeah.
like that exact same scene was in the
Yeah.
Lois and Clark show, or the New Adventures of Superman. So, and the opening, we're talking about other influences. The opening titles sequence is exactly the same from the early Superman movies. So that was another thing that I think as a kid I connected with, and just it's just looking back now, it's more of a guilty pleasure, I guess, because you can't say this is a great movie, but with nostalgia, nostalgia glasses on it, it's still it's entertaining, without.
So is the way of all '90s movies.
Right, everything's over the top and sort of more than meets the eye when you first see like the cover or anything. Whenever you watch the movie, it's just as wacky as possible. So, but it wasn't exactly a failure or anything. It made over $8 million at the box office. It was like over $2 million during the opening weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was a failure, but I mean it's just such a hodgepodge of.
It's become a
mixed
very
things.
forgotten movie. It's one of those movies
Right.
that when you say, Meteor Man. Oh yeah, I remember Meteor Man. Yeah, that used to be my jam when I was a kid.
Exactly.
And then nothing.
Right.
It's like I don't really remember anything about Meteor Man.
Right.
Except that it was Meteor Man.
Exactly, and that's why I wanted to compare to now, because superhero movies are the biggest cash cows that Hollywood has right now. So looking back at these earlier superhero movies, these attempts to make these superhero movies in the early '90s and even late '80s and everything, compared to now, I mean, how would Meteor Man be treated today? Would they even? Do you think Hollywood studios would even take a gamble on a superhero that's not in comic books? And that would, be written, directed by the same person. Like, what do you think of if it would happen now?
No, I don't think it would happen at all now.
No.
I mean, this is the type of movie that, the script might be a little tweaked, but this is the type of movie that just screams like a Catwoman, Elektra type flop.
Right.
I agree. It's just destined to, and the new superhero, you remember Hancock, who was sort of like a superhero. Mm-hmm. It could have that same sort of fate today, probably worse, because there's elements in this that are like a scary movie, where the
the
humor
parody
elements,
kind of very strange.
Are very hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It might be different depending on who it was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if Christopher Nolan came up and he was like, I created this new
Meteor Man.
superhero movie, it's Meteor Man, I'm
Right.
sure they'd be like, well, absolutely.
Well, we're going to do it.
Christopher Nolan, you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
But, a comic, I guess the equivalent would be, maybe somebody like, I don't know, you pick a comic, making their own movie,
Right.
iffy.
Well, yeah. Well, going the opposite of that, they did make a short 6-issue run in Marvel Comics of Meteor Man as a promotional tool for the movie and everything. So, he met Spider-Man, met a character named the Night Thrasher. I'm not exactly who the Night Thrasher is, but
Thrasher.
So they tried to push it. As much as they could. Advertising for this, I'm sure was around, and because there's so many stars, they were definitely pushing people to see it. So let's bring it back to your final thoughts on Meteor Man. What do you think of the film overall?
Overall, it's a very strange film, as I said, and it's a mix of stuff, but it's entertaining.
Right.
It provides good fun, good clean fun, and you always want to. It keeps as much as it's all over the place. It keeps you guessing what next superpower he's going to have next. Mm-hmm. It always surprised me when I thought it couldn't get any weirder. It got weirder.
It did.
And, but it was enjoyable, and it's certainly got a nostalgic value of it.
It does.
It's definitely a product of the 90s.
Oh, it's completely dated. I don't know who Big Daddy Kane is. Sorry.
Sorry, guys.
Or another bad
you don't
creation.
Know who Big Daddy Kane is.
I'm sorry about that. So
yeah.
Yeah. The good points in it. I do think that the score I really liked for some reason. I think I just connected with it. Maybe it's because it sounds like Superman, or some of the quieter moments I like. But I think that in a strange way, it's really trying to be really sincere. I think Robert Townsend, because he did everything on it since he wrote, directed, starred in it. I think that his intentions were really good, and it did shine through in some of the smaller moments of the movie. There's a scene in the town hall where he's sort of talking to everybody about, they kind of have to stand up for themselves, and they want him to leave because he's bringing these gangs back into the neighborhood. So I think that he slipped a couple good, sincere moral issues in there that affected the film in a positive way. Mm-hmm. The bad, obviously, it's very dated. Townsend is awkward, that kind of thing. But I could look past that because it's entertaining, and I could always look at it with those nostalgia glasses on. So
yeah, I pretty much feel the same way too.
Right.
There's good, there's bad, but
there's good, there's bad, but it's entertaining. I think that's what I take away from Meteor, man. Well, I'd like to thank Blake Labriola for taking the time with us to talk with us this week about this very unique superhero film. Be on the lookout for our real review of Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Really looking forward to that. Coming in 2 weeks. And remember, if it's not reviewed here, it just isn't real. I'm Walter Benasiak. This has been Blake Labriola, and we'll see you at the movies.